Arms of sharing, 旅人ASEAN.
Hello, welcome back. Again, joining us is Zain HD from Peace Mill. So, Zain, tell us about Peace Mill. What is it really about? Is it about some meals?
Okay, so Peace Mill is a group that sets forth to bring out the cultural, intellectual, and spiritual understanding of Islam. Mm-hmm. I think when you mention, say, United Kingdom, the first three words that comes to people's minds could be the Queen, the London Bridge, Harrods, for example. Mm-hmm. Now, in some circles, whether in Malaysia or around the world, when you mention Islam, some of them firstly think hudud, polygamy, and terrorism. Yeah. Now, I don't think so. We can stop people from talking about it by imposition in any way. But the only way people can stop talking about that is if you give them other things to talk about. And you often see this happening in countries, how people talk about themselves, how people talk about other people. When there's an alternative or more exciting content to talk about, they'll talk about that. So that's what Peace Mill does. We do a bunch of interactive programs, largely talks. But one of the things that we are working on is to do a youth camp that focuses on conflict resolution and peaceful coexistence. And this camp will be open to non-Muslims as well. Something that I think most Muslims are unaware of, whether from a business point of view or from an idea society point of view, that a lot of the Muslim scholars of the past, and just Muslims generally of the past, they used to come up with ideas that actually solve problems within the community, number one. And number two, that community is not defined as exclusively to Muslims. Like, I think everybody can see this from an Islamic banking point of view. Islamic banking is not confined to Muslims. Even non-Muslims sign up for Islamic bank accounts. So that's one example of an idea that rooted from religion that benefits everyone. So likewise, with the youth camp that we're trying to set up, it's a youth camp that is started by us, and we work with varying groups, but that camp is benefited by everyone. Yeah. So that's just an overview of what Peace Mill does. We're quite new. We're not even 2 years old. Almost reaching 2 years old, and there's a number of things that we're doing, and I think that's probably the one thing that's worth pointing out. Yes.
So coming from an experience of running such a group in Malaysia, what's your take on the current situation?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, that by indication that Peace Mill kind of started as a reaction to the current situation in Malaysia, because I noticed that some people who might say negative or hateful things, they are not by nature hateful. I think it's because if they're only exposed to a certain type of content or certain type of discourse or certain type of things that they hear, they end up getting persuaded by it, and they end up saying it to other people, and not worse still, they end up at times manifesting it. So if they only hear negative news reports about, say, a Muslim harming other people or the other way around. So there are some people, I think, this is, okay, look, now it's quite clear that when people are racist, they manifest certain things that are negative, right? I think what some people don't realize is that there are some people who are anti-racist also manifest hate. So they also manifest hate towards, say, some groups that are doing terrible things. So in their quest to criticize those groups, they end up being hateful themselves. Now, my issue is that neither brings a solution. So how then do you work a solution towards getting what you feel is good, in your case, anti-racist? So that I think is something that I'm noticing in Malaysia, that sometimes the situation becomes bad from one side, and the opposing side that wants to fix it, they actually make it worse. Yeah.
I'll also briefly mention one of the eternal rule from Buddha himself, talking about how hatred does not cease via hatred, but rather through love.
Exactly. So it doesn't change.
Similarly
everyone.
For anger as well.
Exactly. So, and largely we notice that these things come out of ego, right? And I think the Buddhism teachings also tend to, I think, address ego in multiple ways.
Non-self, yes.
Yeah. So a lot of these people who claim well, forget the people who are indeed racist. Let's just tackle the anti-racists. Some people who claim, or even people who fight for more politically just system. Sometimes when they go on and on ranting and they say this and they say that, if you really dig a bit, just have a sit down with them. A lot of it is stemming out of their ego rather than... So initially they may have set up to go out for very non-self reasons.
Yep.
But I think at some point it's very easy to get distracted and be very self-centric. And it's coming out of anger. Once it starts coming out of anger, it becomes problematic. It's not wrong. I'm just saying it becomes problematic.
And we see this in a lot of NGO and religious leaders as well.
Yeah, we do. Yeah, exactly. And the best part is that the people who are not involved, meaning the non-religious, the non-NGO side, the corporate side of people, or they say the layman, they also come up with hateful statements by criticizing, oh, these people, they don't know anything. We know the answers, okay. And after they go on and on and on, and then you find, oh, it is also based on hate or also based on self, So it's quite unfortunate, I think. So maybe that's why, besides the camp that we want to do that teaches people conflict resolution and peaceful coexistence, the whole camp concept is also stemming a lot or coincide with a lot of religious practices as well.
Right.
Like I think Buddhism, you also have your retreats, right?
Right.
From the Islamic spiritual side, from a very, say, higher level, they have this thing called the halwa, which is a spiritual seclusion. So some people do it individually, some people do it in groups. But I think putting that aside, even just the fact, even corporate getaways, corporate companies, they have this thing where they just go away for 1 weekend in resort, they bring all of their staff and they do some training, just to kind of take a step back. So that's the whole thing with perspective as well, handling things. I think sometimes people need to take a step back and just... So the youth camp that we're trying to do is kind of that. Take the kids out of their comfort zone and out of their surrounding and just go outside, have some fun, and take a step back and look all these issues that you're dealing with. Are you dealing it with the right perspective to begin with? And then perhaps talking about solutions. Yeah.
And I think this is also pretty apt in a time where I think religious tension is pretty high.
Oh yeah, extremely high.
In Malaysia. Maybe you can provide some perspective on that and what you propose to be a way forward.
I was at this meeting of stakeholders hosted by Global Movement of Moderates, which is headed by Datuk Saifuddin Abdullah. Yeah, so there was a lot of complaints and criticism and people who are concerned with the religious tensions happening in Malaysia. And one guy from the States, I think he used to work under the President Carter and another president, I can't remember. And he says that, I'm not saying that the situation here is not bad, but he said, I grew up in the World War II period, or was it a Cold? I can't remember what period. And he says, in school, we used to have drills where we'd have to go down to the bomb shelter. In a public school on a normal day, we used to have these situations where we had to prepare ourselves to go down to the bomb shelter, and we actually do it. Now, I'm not saying that the situation in Malaysia is not bad. I'm saying that what I went through was worse. So I thought that was a nice perspective. He kind of put everyone to place. Look, there are many levels of bad, and you guys are only at one level. There's maybe a lot more levels to go through before you reach a breaking point. So I think that's just one thing to kind of highlight, because I think the trouble thing is that people in Malaysia sometimes, because we tend to be a bit insular, we talk about how bad it is, like it's the end of the world. And then sometimes, again, as a matter of perspective, when you talk to some other people, no, the situation can be much, much more worse. And there's actually a lot of positive elements that's within this terrible situation that we claim to be in. But yes, there is a lot of I would say tension happening, and I think at times everyone is just trying to be a part of the solution somehow. Yeah.
I think some people are also worried of the spillover effects from all this tensions that's going on in Myanmar and conflicts that's going on in southern Thailand.
Yeah. I think there's a whole exchange of information thing that's happening, and people are suddenly, or not so suddenly, but gradually becoming more and more increasingly aware and concerned with what's going on elsewhere. And normally that connection is through some identity. So for example, some Muslims are being concerned with what's happening in China in China and also in Myanmar, because the people who are oppressed there are Muslims. These are things that previously did not really matter. Whereas, and of course in Palestine, which has been a long-standing issue, but the same Muslims who speak vehemently about these issues make almost little or no mention at all about what's going on in Sudan, where the Muslims are killing the non-Muslims, and the Muslims are in a better position over there, and they are the ones that are perpetrating the problems, typically speaking. I mean, I'm broadly speaking here. And we can't say that we're very distant from Sudan, because I think Petronas is the biggest or the second biggest oil company in Sudan. And Petronas employs a large amount of Muslims. A lot of the Muslims from Malaysia are being sent there to work. So they're very aware and very near of the intensity that's happening in Sudan. And, you know, if 10 international credible NGOs got kicked out, this is some years ago, were kicked out of Sudan from operations by Omar Bashir at that point, that's a grave problem, but the Muslims say make no mention of it. So there's some problem, at least within the Muslim community. But again, like I said, what's happening abroad is also affecting the tensions at home. 2 years ago, I was part of a small Malaysian delegation which tagged along a meeting between an Indonesian delegation from Indonesia that went to Singapore to meet the Embassy of Israel in Singapore. So the Embassy of Israel hosted this session.
Okay.
It was during Ramadan, the fasting month. So they hosted a session at say 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. and everybody broke fast together.
Okay.
So it was a bunch of Indonesian students that came to Singapore, and then they met at the Malay restaurant. The Israel Embassy hosted the session, I think, and they had a small presentation about Israel, and after that a Q&A, which is very tense in a period in the meeting. And as Malaysians, there was only 4 of us, and we tagged along, but we were very engaging with the people from the Israeli embassy. So I sat next to the ambassador during the breakfast session, and she said something quite hilarious. She says, it's amazing, why are Malaysians very concerned about what's happening in Palestine? I mean, you have bigger problems in Malaysia. So I thought that was very funny for her as a diplomat to say that. I mean, she was basically saying that I understand that there's a problem there, but why are you guys very, very into that problem?
Yep.
I think
protests.
Yeah, coming from a person who is affected by us making noise about that problem, I think she shouldn't have said that. But never mind. I think that some people are a bit unaware of certain context. But I do know. I think, the Buddhist group here is also trying to address what's going on in Myanmar in a very positive light, I thought. And it's very unfortunate that a lot of Muslims here do not know about the situation, about what they're doing here in light of what's happening in Myanmar, or as a counter to what's happening in Myanmar. So a lot of things are happening, but what I felt was worthy to highlight is that there are multiple people doing small efforts, and if you put all of these in line collectively, it does provide a breath of fresh air as to what you often see in the media, and you think that that's the only situation that's happening. Yeah.
In fact, Zain was involved as a speaker in one of the international Buddhist conference that we organized in Malaysia that focuses on interfaith and conflict resolution. And there's going to be a series of initiative being planned out throughout the year that's organized by the International Network of Engaged Buddhists. And of course, Peace Meal being the organizers for a lot of the upcoming events as well, youth camps and whatnot. So definitely check out Peace Meal on Facebook. Any last message to all our listeners?
I think one thing that because a lot of what's happening with the discourse in relation to the Islamic side in today's world has a lot to do with law. Sharia, and you see people cutting off heads for crimes that apparently that they should be doing so, and fine. But I think a lot of people need to be aware that when the message came, the messenger, peace be upon him, came, I think in the beginning there was very little discussion about law, and if people look into the context of his life, his ways and his people, the legal side was, I wouldn't say underplayed, but there was many elements within the religion, within his life, within his society, that went beyond religion. I think, that went beyond law, and that we need to understand that law is often the lower base in society. The aspirations of society, be it Muslim or not, be it this area or the previous era, be it within your community or inter other communities, with other communities, has always been non-legal based. So I think we need to get ourselves out of this legal base, and we need to realize that whenever we talk about the non-legal based stuff, how the messenger changed his society, and mind you, at that point there was a lot of prostitution going on, there was a lot of womanizing going on, there was a lot of ignorance going on, and how he makes you change society is by changing the inward character. His inward character exuded in his outward character, and people observed that, and people respected that. So there's a very strong statement. There's a very nice thing that was once said about the spiritual people. You mean the high spiritual people of Islam? Says they are the people of states and not statements. They're not the people out there who go out there and scream and criticize. Sometimes the best way to change people is to not say anything, but to be that change. And then when people observe it, it comes through. So I think that as a concept in itself is very foreign to us today, because law has to do with words, has to do with actions, has to do with something that happens, very hard. I'm saying hard in terms of empirical, whereas something that's very inward is very metaphysical. So I think we need to highlight these things a bit more and be a bit more aware, and not just something that you just pluck from your own brain. No, but really look at the text, understand the life, understand, how Buddhism handles with these things, how Islam handles with these things, how from the Christianity angle, how is it that Prophet Jesus handled with these things. A lot of them are very inward based. Even the outward stuff has an inward connection to it. So a lot of, we need to kind of look at that.
Personal cultivation.
Yes. Because society is made up of multiple individuals. We need to when we look at society, we need to understand the individuals behind the society.
Yeah, and we have this saying talking about how society ills comes from individual ills.
Yes, there we go.
Thank you so much, Zain, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
We'll see you in the next session, where we're going to cover East and West Malaysia's, mainly East Malaysia issue and politics in Borneo.